Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the BiCurean podcast,
Yes,
live edition.
live edition, live stream, and thank you everyone who's joined us. I know there's probably a host of millions,
Yes.
right? Like that we're there, right? It's
Well,
our
that's
third
the hope.
week. Isn't that how that works? Like you create something and immediately everybody jumps on board.
That's the hope, right?
I mean,
So,
yeah, I've always wanted to be an overnight success. After 5 years of work, because it's about we've been doing this 4 years, right? So
yep.
it's time for us to be an overnight success.
Or at least for people to see how the sausage is made to a certain extent.
Yes, no, it's true. We're learning a lot. And one of the things that we're super excited about our guest, Miguel, we'll bring in just a second, is that he has, um, I would say, years and extensive experience with live radio. And so we're expecting him to teach us all of his tricks, as well as to talk about elections and what else, I mean, basically solve the problems of the world and our problems.
Well, that's always the goal.
Right, I think
So,
so, I think so. So, he's backstage going, I didn't know that I signed up for that."
so without further ado, let's bring Miguel in. And there's his lovely smiling face on the system.
Yeah.
Miguel, welcome.
Hey guys, thank you for having me back. I'm excited that you're on this new uh, programs and system. So I really appreciate you guys bringing me in and sharing with me your wonderful program again.
It has been a learning curve, but we are figuring this out. I think I have finally ironed out all of the audio issues. It's funny, the more complicated setup you have, the harder it is to actually run it. But I think we're there. But Miguel, why don't you've been on the show several times, and you're definitely one of our favorite people.
Well,
But
thank you.
why don't you just, for any new listeners or viewers in this case, tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are.
Well, that's where it's hard being the guest instead of the host because I don't normally talk about myself when I do my show and my program, which is in transition at the moment. But so I've been on radio for over 10 years now. And our program is very similar to yours, with covering the issues that are on hand that we deal with every day as a society. However, uh, our program comes from a Latin perspective. So often we have guests, which doesn't mean we always stay in that box. You know, we like to think outside the box. At least I do, and have folks of all different backgrounds onto our program. So it's very exciting to be on yours. And I guess aside of that, I am currently with Latin Life Denver. So we have an online magazine that we run, which is at latinlifedenver.com. We cover it. COVID was last year was really dry. We did the best we could, but uh, considering, we cover the events that occur in the Latino community, like we're one of the main media sponsors for Cinco de Mayo. That's been canceled now for 2 years. And so a lot of our coverage has been limited. But now that we're starting to open back up, and hopefully uh, we'll get to that point again and be out socializing and mingling with folks and letting them know about our business. Outside of that, I also work with the Denver elections. So I am a supervisor there at the elections division, and which actually I start, we open our polling centers, and this is statewide for the most part. We're opening our voting centers for to assist voters starting Monday morning at 8 o'clock, and that'll run all the way up to election day. So we can cover some topics and issues with that from experience. I've been doing that about 15 years. And outside of that, I just try to stay active in the community and see how I can contribute. I sit on two different boards with the state of Colorado. So that's always a way to keep me engaged and being able to access or talk with the communities of different places in Colorado. So it's
Mhm.
really been an exciting uh, chance to start to reopen again. And I'm glad that see you guys are still here.
We're glad we're still here too, and
Yeah.
I'm glad you're there doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
We've had you on the show, and you do bring a unique Latin perspective, Latino, rights, and all of the different things that you've done, and we should be clear too. Where we cohabitate the same city. Not always the case in this digital and technological world. A lot of our guests are
Yeah.
local people because we've worked in this scene for so long. But
Mhm.
I do enjoy that you have the same kinds of direct experiences, like living
Mhm.
in Colorado and what Denver is like.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I wanted to ask a question. If you feel comfortable answering this, obviously, if you don't, tell me because I didn't ask ahead of time. But
Okay.
I'm wondering if you're willing to speak to any differences that you've seen. You've been working with elections and support, invitation, education, like you said, for 15, 20 years.
Mhm.
And obviously, for those of us who pay minimal attention, there's some concerns about some of the rhetoric that's going on and the things that are occurring. And I'm just curious, as someone who has those boots on the ground, how you experience that or what you've observed.
Sure. Yeah, no, I have no problem with that. I'm a pretty much an open book where my where my emotions on my sleeve. So it is a honor, a privilege for me to work with the elections division because it's exciting. I assist voters in Spanish and in English, those with disabilities, and make sure that they have a positive experience if they need to go into a voting center, which we call voting services and polling centers. And that has changed, but it's the point where I try to explain, because I get that question a lot, as a matter of fact, is what you're hearing out there right now with the different elected officials, mainly, are the ones that kind of uh, get under my skin, is when they speak rhetoric that is absolutely impossible to rig an election. There
Mm,
is no way for ballots to be dropped and all of the other things you hear. Dominion has a lawsuit going on right now at the courthouse here in Denver, uh, again suing folks that have blasted their name. But I've been working for 15 years, and we've had many different issues and problems. And what it comes down to is we're just of service as elected election judges, and I'm a supervisor going back as a supervisor again. Um, and that that no one we never speak about politics. We don't let anybody wear buttons or any flare candidates. If it's an issue that's on the ballot, you can't go into a voting center. You have to be 100 feet away from the entrance if you're going to election and or electioneering. And the fact that now we're being questioned, unfortunately, and we're of all parties. Realistically, we work really hard to make sure that at each, well, actually, it is at each site, um, at the front door when you walk in, there is always two different parties represented. So there is never just one group running an election polling center, or I should say, party affiliated. So Oh, there's your cat.
He was just sitting there as a little face in there, like photobombing. I was just like, oh goodness.
Totally just photobomb.
Well,
That
he
was
brought his
awesome.
favorite toy. He wants us to play with him.
Yeah,
Oh, there you
he
go.
doesn't care what's up. He's like the
Yeah.
toy is what matters. But no, so yeah, there's always multiple party representatives, and
Yes.
there's not a one group domination.
No. And we work really hard at that because I'll be honest, some folks are not interested. But I would suggest to everybody, just mark it, on your registration form, or even just go to your county election um, site or judge website and sign up to be an election judge or work an election, because it gives you the inside scoop of how an election is run and all of the checks and balances. No one person can just bring a bunch of ballots and throw them into a box. That is not even possible. Other one is, if there's not a signature, it gets questioned, it gets thrown out. So I've had a lot of folks starting really 2020, last year's election, a lot of folks that were hearing the rhetoric. And I suggest this to any of your listeners. If you have questions, ask a supervisor at a polling center. Ask them how you can, and in Colorado, you can trace your ballot. So you can see when it's counted, you could see when or that your signature was verified and the whole process. So if you have any worries or concerns, or don't understand the how the elections work, but I will repeat, um, ask one of the supervisors at a polling center and they can show you. We're more than happy to do tours of the downtown election center if groups or organizations have questions. But ask, don't just make things up if you don't know the truth. And it has changed. Last year was difficult. I'm anticipating or hoping this year will be a little bit more uh, easier on my staff, because last year was quite interesting, and I had some em- employees um, not want to stay working uh, because folks were coming at them with this rhetoric.
Mm.
Uh, but I would always tell my staff, and I still do, is don't get into it. Don't try to mention your thoughts. Just simply say, let me get my supervisor. And that's where I get paid a little bit more, to take somebody's anger and explain to them. And I'm more than happy to. Any party, I've had folks from all three of our major parties ask me how the elections run and the checks and balances that we have. No one person does one job without being overlooked by someone else of a different party.
Mhm.
So it's but as I say all the time, just vote. If you want to talk about issues and you want to talk about certain candidates, then fill out your ballot, drop it off. Even if you can't afford postage, when we get it at the elections division, we cover that with the US Post Office. They will not return your ballot. There's legislation in there. But if you have a problem with the system, that's where you talk to your legislator, because they're the ones that pass what we can do and what we can't do. And we're simply just uh, service members trying to make sure that everybody can vote how they want, and their vote is secure, and they're participating, in
Mhm.
democracy.
So, and again, uh, you're a professional at this, and I am asking you to editorialize a little bit. Do you
Sure.
think that for certain people there is any amount of transparency that would actually convince them? I mean, I feel like we're getting to a point where this narrative and this thing that we're really actually fighting here. I mean, I remember a time when if somebody made an outlandish claim, the media,
Hmm.
the officials, the people in trusted areas of authority. But I mean, right now that's not the world we live in. If somebody can literally just say, Republicans are being persecuted and the sky is orange, and seriously there'll be the sky is orange rallies immediately.
Yeah.
It's scary because the truth is secondary. So what's your opinion on the fact that it just seems like I trust our system. I
Hmm.
I I do. I will admit I truly believe that the last election was fair, balanced,
Oh,
um,
yes.
perfectly executed in all of these states. Like we actually have proof from the very Republican partisan-led group in Arizona that insisted on doing a
Mhm.
recount. It actually worked out worse for them. They found
It
more
did.
ballots for Biden and
Yeah.
and had to discount some and or found less than what was originally counted for Trump. So, I mean, even these groups are getting discredited, but it's not actually getting any traction on discrediting things. So, what is your editorialized opinion on that?
Hmm. Um, Good question. And
Like,
I
like what
report
would we have to do to? I mean, do you have any ideas? At this point, I'm brainstorming. Maybe we can start suggesting things together.
the one thing that, for example, I hold a position with my house district with my party, and what we have often done is when questions like this come up, we just simply call up the Denver elections and ask for a tour, and they're more than happy to do it. We have visitors that come in to see how our machines work, to see the whole process from beginning to end from other countries. I mean, we are like this five-star model in Denver and Colorado that it is absolutely impossible uh, for fraudulent votes to be casted. There's such a check and balance. But when you don't give yourself the opportunity to question what you're hearing and fact check it. The news stations often do that. They'll fact check commercials that are for certain ballots or issues, um, and open your mind to those kind of realities, because the media is not the enemy, even though that's what's out there, right? So in the business that we're in, um, before I left iHeart, we had changed to Real Talk 760. And I think what you guys are doing and what I do helps if folks are willing to listen. And I'll tell you, I had more uh, listeners. There were regular listeners that called in and asked questions. They were from an opposing party of mine. But they were willing to want to learn how the what we see in the mass media, okay, like the 24-hour news media, they they were curious about the Latino perspective, and that's often what I do, because I don't know how many times I've seen it before, but they were when they make media makes statements like, well, Latinos believe, or voting this way. No, 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 no. You can't generalize. We make up 23 different nations. So it's one of those, just, oh, research, Eric, I think, and find out the facts, and let yourself be willing to absorb that, and just know that if you're listening to one news station and one elected official or one platform, you're not getting the full scoop, and that goes for all the parties.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I do think There's a couple of very specific networks we could mention that seem to be where a lot of these conspiracy theorists get all of their news.
I
And
try, yeah, not
well,
we
and we've
can,
had,
but
the media literacy chart and that as a
oh yeah.
topic many times on this show because it really does,
Mhm.
and again, we try to be objective. And it sounds
Mhm.
like you try to be objective. And and
Yes.
and so, one of we loved that media literacy chart. That was from the 2016 election, and we actually found the woman that came up with it. And guess where she's from? She's from here in town
Yeah,
with us.
she's
Really?
from Westminster.
Yeah.
Oh, you're kidding.
So
I remember the last show we did, we talked a little bit about that. So,
yeah,
Mhm.
and
We're due to
yes.
have her on again. We had her on recently, so that turned in from like a fun experiment for her to a full-on nonprofit with dedicated, constant updates to the material and constant analysis.
as well as media literacy courses they've developed
Yeah,
for schools and teachers and just the
Oh,
general public.
great.
You can sign up for an 8-week program, and it's not out of this world expensive. Like it's 100% accessible because their goal is to create a sustainable company where they raise
Mhm.
enough money to do the work while also recognizing that they need to make it accessible for people if they're going to participate. And that's one of the most exciting things to me is these solutions like that media bias chart and the media literacy program they have and um RCV,
oh, ranked choice voting.
ranked choice voting. Thanks.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
That's another one that I like very invested in because I think it has a real chance of making a difference.
the main problem, and to my point on this, and acknowledging what you said, is that, yeah, I mean, I feel like people are actually starting to get to a point where they're confirming their own biases, and that's all they're really looking for. And
That's yeah.
it's a hard spot to be. But I mean, even another thing you brought up, the Latino vote, the black vote. How what a conveniently and atrocious way to completely dehumanize an entire group of people racially.
You said it. I mean, it is very unfortunate. And that's actually, you know, from the get-go when I was a teenager, that's what got me into media was uh, how the media portrayed, especially youth and Latinos. It didn't matter what background ethnically, if you were from Cuba or El Salvador or Mexico,
España.
yeah, España. And like my family's been here since the 1600s. We settled the San Luis Valley and we're also the founders of Trinidad. There's a Baca house there in Trinidad that's a museum now.
Very cool.
And with that history, to be generalizing it and saying that that's how folks vote, that's why I got into media. Because as soon as when I was growing up, I saw how the news and the media was portraying kids that looked and were of my age that looked like me, and it was so far de- not demeaning, I guess is not the right word I'm looking for, but it was stereotyping uh,
Mhm.
that all Latinos were into these gangs. And, it was the late 80s, early 90s. And there was. And that was a true fact, especially here in Denver on the north side. But that wasn't our culture. The celebrations on Cinco de Mayo and 16 de Septiembre, like right now, we're celebrating Heritage Month. And some of the stories that have of individuals like Dolores Huerta, who started the farm workers union in California. She comes out here often, very close friend with the family. So often her family will stay with me or she'll stay with us if the program that's inviting her doesn't put her up in a hotel. But normally I always do because she's just such an icon, individual. And I mean, wow, for 90 some years old, you're talking farm working labor folks, and to be portrayed as, well, all these youth are now just gangsters, really got under my skin. And so when my mother asked me what I would want for graduation, maybe a car that I could use to go to college. I liked my car as it was. I put a lot of work into it. So no, that wasn't what I was looking for. She said, well, what do you want? To celebrate, and congratulate you for making it through and on time. That was the other part too. So that was kind of like, I don't know if this is going to happen this year, but it did. I worked hard. I was able to graduate on time, and I said I want a production quality video camera, and that's what I started doing, was going out like on the cruises and getting video of police brutality, really, and how folks were treating these kids that just wanted to cruise in their nice cars. They were getting banged up and beat up, girls and guys. It didn't matter, and so then I would sell that B-roll footage to Telemundo or to whoever really wanted it, Channel 4, Channel 9. And they started doing more stories and showing that these kids, they love their cars, put a lot of work into it, and me included. But that wasn't being portrayed. It was only the violent drive-by sides and things like that. So yeah, I started my own company, Bronze Ink, at that time, doing radio and video production.
I really do appreciate that you've taken that on. I feel like, half the reason we started the podcast was
Hmm.
because it just seemed like we wanted to at least have a platform to talk about things. And I feel like we do less talking about our own opinions. We're progressive leaning and all of that, but
Hmm.
we've even treated this, what I would consider with some journalistic integrity. We bring on other people to state their opinions, and we may say we agree or not. Um,
Especially when they're right.
yeah,
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, like you gotta acknowledge that. And I do want to make a quick distinction because something that you said that I think is important for dominant culture and white identifying people to understand is that, especially as we're seeing some of the tide turn and some of the groups that have been stepped on starting to gain some positions of strength and be able to express their experience is that we'll hear a term that I'm going to say, and I'm going to a caveat ahead of time and say it's not real, but reverse racism, and
Oh,
and and oftentimes the motivation behind that is that someone who is used to being seen as an individual, because that is a privilege of being part of the dominant group, is to be seen as an individual
instead of the Latino vote.
instead of the
instead
Latino
of
vote, and and
they
and
or them.
people, right, as them.
Them.
And so I think it's just I want to name that for folks that maybe haven't heard that outlined in a specific way, because that's the discomfort that if you are a member of that dominant group and suddenly somebody says something about how white people behave or maybe how law enforcement behaves, and you're just like, oh wait, no, not all, so and so. Okay, that's true. That's always true, actually. And the reason that you are having such a strong reaction is possibly because you've never had
Mhm.
somebody treat you as part of a group in that way. They maybe treated you as part of a group in the privileged way, where you get unacknowledged benefits or privileges and advantages that you don't comprehend you're being given, but you aren't necessarily reacted to as if you are taking an action that maybe you would never take. And so, especially to my maybe my liberal colleagues out there who are for the first time have experienced that, I just want to
Mhm.
give them a chance to understand and comprehend that it's exactly the same thing as when we say the Latino vote or something like that. And that's I think a more neutral othering, but still, like you
Yeah.
said, not any more comfortable for the person who is being diminished to a token of a larger group, rather than being given the opportunity in this moment to be seen as an individual human being with whom I am engaging. And so, like, I just encourage my colleagues who have that, or to say, okay, if you're having that discomfort and your reaction is, oh, but not all of them, or not me, step back, recognize this is your turn to bear that discomfort.
Hmm.
The groups of people that are stepping forward and identifying the damage that's been done, I've been bearing it for a long time, along with a lot of really other horrible things, and you can handle it. I'm sure of it. You're gonna be okay.
Yeah.
So just putting that out there because I think it's important to have people understand that parallel and to have a moment to maybe consider how they can step into holding it instead of always making it about the folks that have been carrying it for so long. So
I, just to share a quick story about myself, I went to an elementary school that was in a very, very diverse neighborhood in Thornton. It was all working class, but very diverse. And I didn't know that I was brown or, considered some of the racial slurs that people use. But until I went to junior high, which was in a more further out uh, and Anglo majority uh, population that didn't really have many minorities. I think in that school we had two African Americans, maybe three Asian, and and Latinos. So we would all kind of group together because even didn't matter if we were from different backgrounds, we were the ones being singled out constantly, like daily. And to this day, whenever I step out my door, I know I'm going to be viewed as one of them or those, rather than who I am. And that's, it's unfortunate, but it also creates a lot of fear in folks when they don't understand a topic or a culture that's not theirs. Um, so when they get their hands on something and they just take it as is, that's where it's difficult. I will, just put it in a kind of understanding scenario. I have some voters come in that are deaf, and I've been able to work with them because I know what it means to be different, or considered different. I'm not any different than anybody else, but it's often looked at like that. And so the one thing I've always wanted to do, and I try to learn more, just to educate myself, is sign language, or ways to communicate that let them know that I really appreciate them coming out to vote or to be engaged in what we're working on. And I think some folks just are kind of closed minded to that, and they just go with the fears, with not being able to understand another community.
Absolutely. I'm going to put you into another interesting spot because,
Okay.
well,
Okay.
I think this is important because I think this is this shows has suddenly turned into something I feel is very educational in this particular episode.
We never know.
And well,
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
but so here's the thing. One of the things that I saw on the news the other day, being spoken by some white talking head, I don't even remember if it was male or female, but they brought up that the Latino vote traditionally has been viewed as this progressive thing, but the reality is that that's not true. That in fact, a lot of Latinos, especially the older generations of Latinos,
Yes.
are very conservative. Can you speak about just so that I wouldn't want to ever frame this, even if somebody told me what to say. But you as a Latino person, can you frame a little bit what the Latino experience is and some of those things like what's fact and fiction about just that statement that some news person said?
Okay. Well,
You don't have to go into too much detail. Just maybe a
yeah,
broad
I
broad
won't.
view of what Latino experience of politics is.
Well, and like I was mentioning about um, the active police brutality that occurs in communities of color, I don't like to generalize because you can always figure, no matter what group. And I'm a former officer, so I wore the badge, I took the oath, and I had good and bad coworkers. So it's really difficult to generalize, but you can kind of lean towards the experiences that the Latino community has. For example, if you're of generation here in Colorado, in the United States, really, and you have probably a different perspective because you've been raised in the school system, and you have the active communities of different communities that you interact with, and so those that come from or newly arrived often come from socialistic uh, communities or countries, or very dominated excuse me, different than democracy. So democracy is a hard concept to understand, and often there's one gentleman I work with that speaks only Spanish, and I read the full ballot to him because he, one, only speaks Spanish, he's monolingual, but two, cannot read in Spanish or in English. So I literally read the ballot for him. And I'll be honest, without knowing how he voted, or how folks like to vote, what party they're with, uh, can vary because it depends on their experiences, that from what country and how long are they a citizen of the United States, to have a different perspective that democracy works different. And because we're in a test phase. I mean, anybody that's been paying attention to politics the past, well, geez, 4 years has been in our face.
It
But
feels like a lot longer.
yeah, it does. It does. And if you go back, I've been a delegate twice to the national convention, um, but I go every 4 years to the convention. I've been doing that since 1984. Oh, that now I'm going to give away my age, but it's
And mine, because I'm pretty sure we're contemporaries. So,
yeah,
so
okay. I'll
shh.
play.
No.
So, but it's always been fascinating to me how, even within the same political party, the different perspectives. You have some that are very extremely progressive, and we see that in our legislation, our legislators now, our congressmen especially. Um, but they don't think like I do. They may have come from Cuba, uh, which tends to be very conservative. And those that are third or generation Americans uh, tend to be a little bit more liberal, or progressive, and it just depends. But that's the beauty part of this test, is testing democracy.
So let me first say thank you, because you did exactly what I was hoping you would do, which was make that not into a generalized answer, which I do appreciate, because the reality is your experience isn't much different from mine. I'm just as likely to run into somebody who's a white conservative as a white liberal, male, female. They might be older, they might be younger. We on the white end of the spectrum over here get to be all those individuals. And the reality is, you illustrated perfectly that everyone in the Latino community is also an individual. Counting on it being one thing or another is part of the flaw and part of the dehumanization I think we do in general. And so your answer off the cuff did kind of confirm something that was like, thank you for actually explaining it from a Latino perspective, that it
Yeah,
is completely unique and individual,
Each person has their view, their experience, their motivation for it,
which
and
which might be different than the white, because I'm not from Cuba, and so I
are
don't
you
have
not?
that experience.
yeah.
But the fact, and just the fact that you're able to say, somebody from Cuba might be this or that, but it's not even like it's predictable, and it's based on the experiences that you understand more.
Yeah. No, I think that spectrum is important. I also, when I was in high school, I had the privilege of being an exchange student.
Oh, how fun.
And yeah, I really wanted to go to Venezuela, and I couldn't afford it. I came from a poor family, and I applied for a scholarship. But at the time, there was a congressional scholarship for exchanges between America and Germany. It was instituted after the war to attempt to build relationships. And so I lived for a year in Hamburg, Germany, and
Wow.
yeah, and I studied. I went to school there. And one of the I was and I actually went. I'll out us now. The year after the wall fell, I applied for the scholarship
Wow.
in the fall of 1989, and then the wall fell, and I went in the summer of 90. And so I get to be there for unification, which
Exciting.
was yeah, it was
She
amazing.
was at youth rallies for unification
Yeah.
right after the wall fell in
Wow.
Berlin and surrounding cities in Germany.
Yeah, and it was a transformational experience, and I'll never forget this moment when I was with one of my German high school friends, and we are chatting, and she's like, "Are all Americans like you?" And I was like, "Are all Germans like you?"
Yeah.
and you know,
Well said.
but in German, and and she was like, "Well, no," and I said, "There you go," and so for me, you know, from that time of being the other, right? And
Mhm.
having to, you know, quote unquote represent my people, I got a lot clearer on what that is, right? Like that, yes, in some ways I can tell you something about other Americans. Like we love Kraft macaroni and cheese, which has no cheese in it, and they freaked out by that. They're like, "What is this?" Like I gave some to my German friends. I was so excited to share this gourmet special food experience. And they're like, powdered cheese? I'm like,
Wow.
I'm
Yeah.
like,
What
but
is
it's so delicious. What's
how
wrong with you? You know?
my good are you going to space anytime soon?
Yeah, right. And no, they just, you know, of course they eat real food. But so there were ways in which I could, of course, represent some cultural trends. And yet
Mhm.
at the same time, I knew in that moment when she asked, I'm like, no, I didn't have to say no. All I had to do was point out to her, what's your experience? And she was immediately there with me. And so I feel like that was one of the things. I'm actually a huge proponent of youth exchanges. I think that if
Oh yeah.
because America is such an isolated country in a lot of ways, and I think that if more of our young people actually had those experiences and were able to go and at a formative age, right,
Right.
engage with people from other cultures, I think that that would give us a lot more compassion, maybe, and a lot less fear of difference. If you know, if you have that, and I obviously wanted to go, so I brought something to it that was because I had to work really hard to make it happen, and I still think it would be valuable to I thought that was such a great program, you know, that our country, invested in.
Exactly. And uh, that is such an awesome experience. I'm glad you had a chance to do that. That sounds really exciting. I'd want to hear more. Um, and just kind of to add to your uh, statement, do you realize that when I'm here in, I'm not asking you specifically if you realize, but just making a statement that here in America, I'm not considered American, even though I'm um, like 13th generation or 14th generation of this area before the state was a state. And I'm not considered an American. I'm considered a Mexican or Hispanic, depending on what term. Latinx is now the thing, which is true. My ancestors were uh, part of Mexico, but they were also Sephardic Jews that we've been able to trace back that were fleeing Spain in the 1600s to avoid the Inquisition. And so, as they traveled up north, they've kept a lot of traits, but they would come and look or practice Christianity, but they kept a lot of the Jewish traditions in the Catholic Church. But when I go to Mexico, I'm not considered Mexican.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that sounds like
I'm an
it's
American.
lining up to be that story where you really don't fully belong anywhere.
No, yeah. I mean, I love the valley. Like I just spent now that I'm on the board for the Colorado State Fair, I go down to Pueblo once, sometimes twice a month for meetings. And Fiesta Day was beautiful. I rode a horse in the parade. And to see the culture And the gente is a term we use, which is like la raza, sort of. It's kind of like our elders, our people. But pueblo is even a different, or the San Luis Valley is has a different take on a lot of issues than Latinos that grow up in the city in Denver, and we're only 2 hours apart.
Well, I'm gonna make a statement, and maybe this make the national news.
Oh boy.
I'm
Thanks.
all ears,
We're
man.
Well,
ready.
and it's interesting because we have we have somebody on the chat that just pointed out, that it sounds odd to them because they're from New Orleans, with tons of people of Spanish descent that's been there for 500 years. I mean, how could they get, any more American than that? I'm third generation, half Italian descent. Um, so very recent. It sounds like your family's been here longer than mine has.
Hmm.
But one thing I will tell you, 100 years ago, there was lynchings of Italians. They were
Uh-huh.
not faring any better than most of the other brown races.
Mm-mm.
And at some point, through some means, I mean, this is an interesting anecdotal story, especially because it just happened. But let's be clear that the Italian Heritage Day that became Columbus Day was suggested because the Italians were so persecuted at the time. They were really looking for a way to convince people that they
We're
could
human.
be human and good Americans. And they said, but this is the person who discovered your country. How could you hate Christopher Columbus when he discovered America? I mean, that's literally the angle that they were playing. And that's why Columbus
Hmm.
Day became a
And it
thing.
worked.
Mhm.
It opened a whole other can of worms. But let's be clear that now I'm considered white.
Yeah.
So now I get to, as you just pointed out, be an American, even though my family and my heritage has been here less time than yours has. I get to, I mean, it really does illustrate that the color of your skin, and even though Italians were not considered white until less than 100 years ago,
Hmm.
I get that benefit,
Mhm.
and you still don't.
Yeah.
I sit on another board called the Coalition Against Global Genocide, and you would be surprised at we're actually planning, and I'm gonna sell my pitch here. if
Please do.
if you go to uh, it's capital capital A, capital G, co coag dot com. We're starting up this, and Eric, what you brought up, we're starting up a Hispanic, or I mean, I'm sorry, a heritage tour. Now, this global genocide was originally started about 12 or 14 years ago, and I never heard of it. So the uh, the the individual Roz Duman who started the nonprofit came to me once and asked me if I'd be interested in sitting on the board and helping them rebrand, kind of make it a new modern day, but to also emphasize how can we get more education out there, teaching about not just the Jewish community, but what has happened in the Asian community, what's happened in the Irish community. I know that when I was on my Weekend Wisdom radio program, I would have Dr. Tom Noel come on during St. Patrick's Day to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. But I always had a guest host, and it was Michael Bull Berrigan. So, and folks would actually ask me, why don't I have Michael on more often? I'd say, well, that's me. That's just, changing my name to what it would be in Irish. Um, However, Miguel Baca Barragan would become Michael Bull Berrigan, which is kind of a translation in somewhat. But this Hispanic Heritage Tour, there's this heritage tour that we're going to start. We're working with all of the local museums in different communities. So like Pueblo, like Trinidad, uh, we're looking at Fort Collins, down south, and it's a tour that folks can pay to go on. We're going to get a bus and go down to maybe like where Ludlow occurred and have an expert historian there um, share, because I always thought Ludlow was Mexican miners. No, there was 13 different uh, communities or communities of culture that worked in that mine and were massacred because they wanted better working wages and environment. Uh, and Roosevelt at the time, not Roosevelt, the Carnegie, I think, is who assembled the militia of Colorado to basically tempt them or scare them to going back to work. And one day they just took them out, and it was mainly children that died that day because they were in a school underground. But there was different cultures all working together to to work that mine. And that's what I think what you mentioned there, Eric, we don't realize that if we take the time to listen to the different stories, you'll find that we have more in common than differences.
I mean, we actually just went on vacation, and I love driving through New Mexico, and we drove past
Yeah,
Santa Fe, and I mean, it's one of the oldest settlements in this country, like on
the
par with I forget the city in Florida, but it's recognized as being one of the
oh yeah,
oldest, the oldest settlement. But Santa Fe is like right behind it, settled by Hispanic, settlers that essentially became the Mexicans, like prior to there being a Mexico. Let's be clear. Um, it's so built into the heritage here. I mean, New Mexico is as old Mexico, really, when
yeah,
it comes down to it, right?
that's
So
right.
Mhm.
I just find it astounding, but it's still, I think it really just does come down to, the othering of people. Like I said, I mean, if Italians were, I think if Italians had a traditionally darker complexion, uh, it could have just as easily gone the other direction. And that's what we have to overcome. They talk about it being a culture war in this country, but it really is. It's culturally like based on where you're from.
Well, and I know that, because when I first discovered that, the lynching in New Orleans and the there was an op-ed in the New York Times that occurred in the early part of the 1900s, and the op-ed in the New York Times about the murder of, I want to say it was either 17 or 23 Italians,
Mhm.
by a mob, was that it was great because they were exterminating the vermin.
They
That
were cleansing the snakes from this country.
right, and it was one
Wow.
of those like how and
all,
that
all based on the fact, and I like to share this story because I just want people to know how far one culture can come. But I mean, it's all based on the story. There was a dying, literally the chief of police was found stabbed and dying. He was
and he was Irish.
and his last words were "Dago,"
Yep,
and they just
Oh,
proceeded to hunt down 23 Italians and lynch them.
yep.
oh my.
They said, and it was one of those like shocking, horrible things that occurred, and then because of that vitriol and hatred, there was this effort to change that
So the
perception.
New York Times. This is in New Orleans. The New York Times is writing about getting rid of the snakes.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's how bad that was. And then, like I said, I mean, I'm just not olive skinned enough.
But now
So now I
today,
get to be white, and
nobody would
I
say
almost
that,
feel a guilt about that, right?
right?
And nobody, and I mean, literally, the only problem Italians have right now is that they're usually too loud in restaurants. But
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what's happened all throughout America. Is it changes? There's a wonderful exhibit. If you guys or any of your listeners have a chance to check out the History Colorado Museum in Pueblo, they have uh, a presentation called Borders, and I've recently just gone through, was there, and went on a tour. Had actually the CEO there take me through their exhibit, and the how many times the Southern Colorado has changed hands. It went from being Native, Mexico in general, from Native American and South America too, to Spanish, changing the dialect, the language, and a lot of the culture, then changing to Native American, or having Native Americans intermix with Spanish, which became the term mestizo, which means blood mixture. And it was the mestizo that uproared against Spain, because of a lot of like what America did with Europe. The taxing was just outrageous and they weren't getting the rights. So they wanted their independence. They won that. And so everything that was claimed by Spain, which is everything south of the Arkansas, which is pretty much where Pueblo is, became from Spain, became Mexico. But the territories changed. So a lot of different Native American tribes claimed those areas as their territory. Um, and then when the state became a state, everything, the border shifted again. For example, my ancestor, um, I want to say it was probably about 12 generations before me, was born in Spain, in the San Luis Valley, born in Spain, um, and then became a Mexican uh, a year after he was born, and then became an American before he passed away. And he was a citizen of all three nations. But and that has always been a difficult subject. Where's the I used to hear a lot growing up. Where are you from? I'd say from here.
Thornton.
Yeah,
Thornton.
yeah, yeah. You remember that? They'd say, what part of Mexico? And I'd say 84th and Washington. so, so it's been, but we all have more in common. It's just our stories are a little different, but the same. Every culture has been persecuted in some way in America.
Which, if we would just be a little bit aware of that everybody's culture at some point has probably had a rough time, you'd think
Yeah,
there'd be some kindness.
yeah, yeah. Or instead of, I don't want to say such, once everything changes hands, oh, look, now I get to treat others like my family's been treated.
But isn't that exactly how a lot of this racist stuff starts? That's my opinion, is that, I mean, so I'm going to share this. I come from an Italian family, and they were very racist towards black people, like the older
Mhm.
people, the older generations in my family. But I mean, it was literally a pecking order totem pole. There was only one group that was
Yeah.
below them, and they had to have some power over something. I'm not justifying it. I don't think it was good. I hated how racist my grandparents were.
Hmm.
But in being that my family was from New York and New York Italians, and in cities like Newark, which are very widely known as being, heavily slanted towards black, and then the Italians were in that same neighborhood, and literally the only people below them were the black people
Wow.
socially. And that is where a lot of that stuff, and I mean, I guess the only thing I can hope for is that dies off with certain generational changes coming up. But we really need to, like, educate and be able to have
Mhm.
conversations like this, Miguel. Is one of the reasons I really appreciate you. We've had a lot of good conversations, you and I even specifically. So
Well, and I
Yes.
will say, like, if you're listening to the show, there's so many things that Miguel has talked about on our two other shows with him that I'm kind of tempted to ask leading questions because the stories are so powerful and his knowledge is so deep. So I'm going to encourage you to go listen to them, but I'd also love to have some shows where we talk about where you were almost born and the things you know about the border and the
Yeah.
treaties that none of us really knows, and just dig into some of that because I think it bears repeating, and I know I learn so much every time that we have you on the show and we talk to you. It's because and I think that's part of it. Like, no one can know everything, and I do think that's the other thing is sometimes that people, I myself included, you get I don't know, shy or embarrassed, like, oh, I didn't know that, and it's okay. Like, sometimes we don't always
it's
know
okay to
even
learn
know.
something
Yeah,
new today.
we don't always
Mhm.
even know what to go seek out, and that's one of the reasons that, being curious, seeking people out, going. I love this museum tour that you're talking about. I'm definitely
Yes.
gonna check that out. And, we'll put notes to that, it links to that in the show, of course, so that folks have a easy access to it because that's the way that you can learn what you don't know, and that you can also get some sense of that connection to this larger story. Because the one of the rules, hidden rules of becoming a white identity, is you have to disconnect from your history,
Yeah.
and you have to stop be and I think that we should work to change that part of being an American is not about being white, but it's about being connected. Like, I don't know anybody that does more honestly than you do. You tell stories of the I'm on the board of this and I'm on the board of that and I'm like, do you sleep? How are you doing this? And that, like, that's what is going to make a difference, right? Like, if we're all doing what we can, contributing, learning, connecting, as opposed to thinking we know, right? Deciding we've got this, and then, acting from that confidence, that ill-informed confidence.
Yep, that's
Yeah.
exactly right. In fact, this Hispanic Heritage Month that we've been celebrating goes until October 5th, tomorrow. It looks like, and
One
you had
more
a
day,
wonderful date.
folks.
Hurry up, guys. Yeah,
It
tomorrow.
is tomorrow, so you have me in on the month celebration. And there was a program I was watching. I believe it was one of the local news stations, and they were highlighting some of the issues that Latinos go through. And just so that we're clear, when you don't understand something, you often make uh, dumb or uneducated statements. So it was not common, or it was not uncommon for me to hear, especially when I went to school in Oakland, being called a pocho, which is like a sellout kind of to my culture in Spanish. And often, uh, if you spoke English or worked in a certain, you know, organization or something along that line, say you want to go to law school, you know, you would often hear your own culture say things like, well, don't be so whitewashed, and it's like, why are we trying to find reasons to separate and to be acknowledging the differences, even in our own cultures, then celebrating the things that we have in common? But it was a great discussion they had, um, and I could relate to that. But it's unfortunate, like you were saying, that it does take just that desire to learn about something you don't understand or are questioning.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I really appreciate it. Um, Unfortunately, we are running a little over on time here. We're gonna have to
Oh,
like I could just keep talking
yeah,
all night.
Yeah.
I love talking with you guys. It's always a pleasure to be on your program.
Yeah, no, we really appreciate you. We're gonna have you on more. I hate to say it, but we are heading towards. I feel like it's another tour of duty in Afghanistan or something. Even though I've never
Mm.
had that experience, but with elections coming up, again, I'm just like, oh, I'm not ready.
Yeah,
No.
you should have your ballots. Just folks in Colorado that are tuning in, you
And this
should
is
have
the
your
this is the
ballot.
lightweight off season one. We're gonna
It
have
is.
another one that's gonna start on November 4th. So,
Hmm. And yep,
so
and you can mail in your ballots. You can go in person and vote in person, and it doesn't matter what county. For example, I've had folks that come from uh, different counties, Arapahoe County or Jefferson County, and even sometimes down south, but they're in Denver. And it doesn't matter where you drop your ballot. You can drop it off in Denver, and we every night make exchanges, and the post office, and we'll get it to your county, so it'll get counted on time. And so there's a lot of confusion out there about elections, but the reality is trace your ballot, know when it's shipped out, and just know that make sure you get it in by 7 p.m. on election day. And you can register up to the last minute now. So the election day, you can go into your polling center and register to vote if you have not registered in Colorado. So we have we really try and make it as easy as possible to vote in this state, which is awesome
Mhm.
because of the checks and balance. But I mean, if you don't vote, you're really working hard not to vote.
Yeah.
You almost have to try. And look, it's funny because this last year, of course, mail-in ballots were a thing. But let's be clear, that's been I haven't voted not by mail-in ballot in freaking 20 years. Like
No, it's
absolutely, like Colorado's just had that down, and,
mhm.
and we were the
Oh yeah,
model, and people wanted to tear it apart. But even then, like, um, I have tended to vote by mail-in ballot and actually still drop them off at balloting places
yeah.
because it's the easiest way to ensure that it actually got to where I wanted it to go, but gave me the convenience of getting it mailed to me early and being able to vote when it was convenient. I think I signed up for it when I was going on vacation like 20 years ago, and then they just kept me on the list. So
Yep.
like I love how we do it here.
We
Um,
don't purge.
Yeah.
We don't purge. If you didn't vote, you may go inactive, and if you don't get your ballot, go to your local polling center. Um, and like I have ever since we got the computers out, where you can use the tablet to vote and
Mhm.
it's a touch screen. I love that because with OCD, I can't color in those circles without really making myself anxious.
I love
it,
you.
it, it is
If
it
I
is
get outside the
anxiety
line,
inducing.
Mhm.
yeah, if I get outside the line, I'm done. It's over with for me. So now I just use the touch screen. They're great for folks that are disabled. We have a lot of voters that use those if they're hearing impaired or have physical disabilities, or visually impaired. And the fact that it's not hooked up to any internet,
Yeah.
it's not hooked up to any main
Yeah.
device,
People do
and you
not get that is not how the system actually is set up
no,
to work.
Mhm.
and it actually prints your ballot. It's just a marking device.
Mhm.
And I really want to explain. So I've been using that ever since they first came out, and I was trained on it. And I'll have to be honest, since I've been 18, I've always gone and voted the day of elections. So I still keep that tradition.
Oh,
I wait
wow.
till the last day, which is don't do that. Don't do what I do.
No, okay.
If you can do it
Colorado's a
early,
bumper.
you might as
You're an
well.
example in so many ways. So this is the one, and don't copy that. And
Don't
I
do
want
what
to
I
draw
do.
attention to this because I want to hear what I think your answer is, which is one of our listeners and one of our favorite people. Thank you for being here, Mikey. Asks, do you guys think Election Day should be a paid day off?
Yes.
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 I absolutely can. I mean, we have a lot dumber holidays than that, so I think it absolutely should be.
Yeah. When I'm all about access, because I have to say I've been spoiled ever since
Well, let's be
I
clear.
started voting.
Us progressive-minded people are all about access. What we're
Oh,
fighting right now is the folks
Well,
that seem to be not about access,
well, and like I have
yes,
which
had
ultimately feels more un-American to me.
it is.
But for some
it is.
reason, I'm the
Yeah,
un-American
no,
one.
no, we need to reclaim patriotism. No, we're patriots. We're about access. And I've had that experience both in Colorado and then the other state that I lived in, Washington State, also is both a permanent mail in ballot. So I hadn't actually gone to a polling or place to vote in person since a long time, like it's been like 22 years. And I forgot actually how horrible that is because I did do it a couple of times before I moved to Washington. And,
Mhm.
even you have to get there and stand in line and it can be too hot and all of this stuff and it's hours. And then, and I'd have to write down, all of my thoughts and blah, blah, blah. And here I get to sit in my living room with my cup of
Mhm.
tea and look up all of the newspaper opinions. And it can take two
Yeah.
or three nights. I feel so confident that I'm making an informed decision, that I'm actually voting on a ballot issue with some sense of actual awareness.
Mhm.
And so it's not just the access to be able to vote, it's also the access to be able to feel confidence that I actually know what's going on, and then I'm able to really be present to the situation, as opposed to get there, stand in line forever, hope I got everything figured out.
Yeah.
And then one of the places I voted, they wouldn't let you take notes in. So I had to like memorize it before I went in. It was just like, and that was pre-cell phone. I don't even know what they did with
Wow.
that. Yeah, they have a lot of laws, right? And they're
Yeah.
intended for different things. But yeah, so at any rate, I just want to say, like, I love Colorado. I love Washington. I love that access, and I'd love to see more places replicate that. And I'm hopeful
Mhm.
that'll this current spate of anti-election freedom will maybe be overturned. So, next week's Lorena Garcia talking about the Supreme Court. If you want to join us for our live stream,
One of the people we've worked with that's been a candidate before. I'm
yep.
not sure if you've ever had a chance to
For
speak
the
with Lorena.
Colorado?
Lorena Garcia ran for Senate last
You
year.
know Lorena.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. 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 Of course I do. Of course I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had Sonia. She's a close friend of the family, Sotomayor.
Uh-huh.
So
Mhm.
that was in my head was the Supreme Court, the
Oh,
U.S.
we would love to have her on the show.
If
I
she's ever
would
not
love to have
busy,
her on
yeah,
mine too, but that's this now. Maybe after if she leaves, but her book is outstanding.
yeah, I
Uh-huh.
need to read it.
If you have not read it, wow, talk about overcoming challenges.
Yeah.
She has an incredible story. So yeah,
Yeah.
no, Loretta, so she's on next week.
She's next Thursday, and
Mhm.
then Eric's going to be on 604 Atheist this Saturday.
Yes, that should be interesting because I'm going to be in the same boat you're in, Miguel, where I'm going to be the guest instead of the host.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, I'm
Uh,
gonna I'm gonna bug you after and see how it feels. See.
I'm highly malleable. Well, I'm
uh,
hoping it'll just work out. So,
and
Oh,
thanks.
it'd be great. I know it will.
well, you've always been a
You're
solid guest for us, and we'll definitely post up links to your shows and information as you have sent them over. But well, I highly suggest people follow Miguel, and he's always been
Oh,
a very solid supporter of what we do. But I'm also a very solid supporter of what he does. So I can't recommend you enough.
so
Hey, love you guys.
love you.
Keep
Thank you
up
so
the
much.
hard work and anything I can do to help. Just give me a holler. I am not just your friend or your colleague, but uh,
Kindred
it's
spirit.
family.
I
It's a
appreciate
family.
that.
Yeah,
Yep.
So
we have a lot of the issues that we concern ourselves with. We share together, and knowledge is everything.
Yeah.
yeah. I completely agree. Again, thank you for being on the show. I
Thank you
look
to our
forward
listeners.
to, yeah, thank you to our listeners for tuning in and definitely look forward to chatting with you again soon. We'll bring you on. So,
Sounds great.
Hey, love you guys. All
See you
right,
again,
thank you.
everybody.
all right. Thank you.